I'm an American living in Italy, and here are 5 of the biggest culture shocks I've had since I moved here 5 years ago. And I know a lot of people make these culture shock videos after a vacation or something, but these are some of the ones that I think you wouldn't notice until you live here long term. The first one is about drugs and medications here. What we call in the US over the counter drugs aren't really a thing. What we think of as over the counter is medications that you don't need a prescription for. You can just walk into any grocery store, gas station, pretty much anywhere. They have, I think, vending machines with Tylenol and aspirin in the US, and it's famously very cheap over there. And here, you don't need a prescription, but you can only get them from an actual pharmacy, and you have to go up to the counter and ask for it, and they'll give you a pack of like 10 pills or 12 or something, and it will be 10 euros. Basically, it's really expensive, and you just can't get a big bottle of 100 Tylenol. What you can get over the counter at pharmacies are vitamins, supplements, and you can buy a lot of screening tests that you can take home and do yourself, like for strep throat, flu, pregnancy, of course, and COVID, but also some random ones like vitamin D deficiency. Pharmacies also carry high-end skincare, hair products, and makeup, but there are other stores to go to where you can find more basic brands at better prices. One thing you'll never see lined up on the shelves will be anything medicated or any actual medications. I think that's a good thing. I think because of the national healthcare system here, if you have long-term pain, you go to the doctor and you get checked for it. And if you're sick, you don't just go to work and just power through it like we do so much in the US. So on one hand, I think it can be good sometimes to just let your body be sick and not just try to immediately like mask all the symptoms that you have. But on the other hand, I think people just tend to prefer what they're used to. I have recently had a cold over the holidays, and I was really glad that I had stocked up on Dayquil because there just isn't the equivalent here. They don't really do like combo drugs like that. And I do like that it's easier to find more natural and herbal remedies here. And they actually, I think, work really well. For a sore throat, you can get cough medicine from the pharmacist, but what you can also get just, I guess, over the counter is propolis, an herbal spray that I personally love for sore throats. And even cough drops will have more natural herbs and vitamins in them to boost the immune system rather than chemicals and food coloring. So there's a lot of things like that that come from nature that are more widely available and less expensive, and I think can be just as useful and probably better for your health than like a chloroseptic spray. One thing that was a huge shock when it comes to pain relief though was when I went to the dentist for the first time and I had to get a filling done. She started setting up the drill and I had to ask if she was going to give me Novocaine, and she seemed surprised. Apparently a lot of dentists don't do it unless you ask, and a lot of people just don't need it or don't think they need it or just are used to I don't know. That's one thing that I don't understand why it's not more widely used. And even when I did get it, it wasn't as strong of a dose. I still felt it. It was still painful, and I kept asking for more, and they were like reluctant to give me more Novocaine, even though it's not a drug that, as far as I know, like you're not going to get addicted to it. I have a few friends who've had babies here, and I was also surprised to learn, and they were surprised to learn, that not every hospital offers epidurals when you're giving birth, and you have to verify in advance, and I think you have to order it in advance or request it. I think that's also pretty bizarre. I think it should be available for people who need it. I don't know. Call me crazy. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is how pets are treated here. I was pleasantly surprised when I was looking for an apartment to find that pets are not discriminated against nearly as much here as in the US. So the reason I never had a pet until I was in my 40s was because when I rented apartments in the US, like 80% of places did not even allow pets at all. And the ones that did allow pets, they charge an extra fee. Sometimes it was an extra deposit, usually both an extra deposit and what they called pet rent, which means that they would charge an extra $50 to $100 a month per pet, as they called it, pet rent, which I think it's discriminatory, right? Pets are a luxury you can only afford if you have an extra $100 a month on top of how much it costs to have a pet. And here, there's the opposite law. If you look on apartment rental sites, you will never see a category that says pets allowed, yes, no. It's illegal for landlords to say in the listing that you're not allowed to have pets or to charge extra for pets. And of course, I know that this isn't always probably followed to the letter of the law. If someone has very big dogs and they go to rent an apartment, the landlord might reject them and that might be the real reason, but they can't really say that that's the reason legally. For me, having a cat, I would always bring it up to my landlords because I didn't want any problems, but it seemed pretty irrelevant in the rental process. And I really like that. I think that people who rent should be allowed to have pets. So yeah, pets in general are treated better, I think, if you travel to other European countries. And even I think if I go back to the US, I can get a little pet passport for my cat, which I think is really cute. And when you go to the vet, they give you a little record that you can carry to different vets. It shows your pet's microchip number and all of your vaccination records and everything. I think that's really nice. One thing that is strange to me about pets here, I noticed when you're walking around parks and people have their dogs and everything, most male dogs are not neutered. My friend actually is Canadian and she went to get her dog neutered after he was a year old or so. And the vet like kind of questioned her, asking like, why do you want to do this? In North America, it's pretty standard to spay and neuter your dogs and cats to keep the pet population down, especially for dogs, I think, because people walk their dogs all over the place and don't want your dog getting busy with other dogs in the park. So apparently it's not really a thing. And I asked her, like, how do they prevent unplanned doggy pregnancies? And she said female dogs are spayed, I believe, and male cats maybe are more commonly neutered. I don't really know. I've just seen a lot more aggression of dogs towards other dogs, and people keep their dogs unleashed a lot. The not neutering thing was definitely a surprise to me. Let me know what you think. I know it's different in different countries, but if you're in Europe, is that like a European wide thing? Or is it mostly an Italian thing? So that's just a huge difference that I noticed. The next big culture shock, the coffee culture is definitely different here. There's a few things. First of all, the way you order and pay for coffee in a cafe, there's just so much inconsistency. Like you never know. Sometimes you have to go inside and pay and then get your receipt and take it to the bar, and the barista will give you your beverage. And sometimes you can just sit down and the barista will come and take your order and then bring you your coffees to your table. Sometimes you can go inside and order and then you go sit down and then they bring it to you and you pay after you finish your coffee. It's sometimes hard to tell what the order of things is. Like when you walk into a coffee shop, you just don't know. I used to think it was just the smaller local coffee shops that use this sort of honor system. But this cafe is at the mall and it was the same thing. I ordered, drank my coffee, took my time, and I didn't have to pay until I was on my way out. In general, I think if you walk up to a cafe and there's menus on tables outside, generally that means you can sit down and someone will come take your order, but sometimes not. Sometimes you'll sit at a cafe that has a menu and you'll just be sitting there and then they don't notice you. So you have to go in and place your order at the bar. So I don't know. It's not a big thing, like I said, but it's one of those silly things that are hard to figure out. So another thing about coffee shop culture, and this is something sometimes I like and sometimes I don't. In general, cafes are definitely more places for socializing than for working. So you don't see people pull up with their laptops and use the cafe as like an office. There are certain kinds of coffee shops for that. They'll have outlets, they'll have space for people to work or study. But even at those cafes where it's acceptable to sit and work, they will have designated hours where you can't. And that place, I think they serve lunch there. So they want to save the tables, obviously, for people who are eating. And it's usually like either you're stopping in and drinking coffee real quick, or you are hanging out with a friend and socializing. But yeah, you're generally not just using it as an office. Another thing that was a pleasant surprise when I moved here, most apartments, you'll have a washer in your unit. More people own their apartments than rent. So, of course, if you own the place, you want to have a washer in your house. You wouldn't want to like share with the whole building. But in the US, where I'm from, most apartment buildings are usually owned by a company or by a single person. Most apartments I had communal washers and dryers. So there was like a little laundry room somewhere in the building. My last apartment that I had, there was 2 washers and 2 dryers for the entire building, and you had to pay for it. You have to hope that no one else is using it. You'd have to hope it's not broken. You'd have to hope the quarter machine wasn't full because then you couldn't use it. It was always a big pain to do laundry. So you'd let your laundry pile up, or I would, but you always had access to a dryer so you could dry your clothes really quickly. Here, most apartments will have just a washer. Dryers are not as common, I think, because of the whole like venting system you need, and people don't tend to have like garages edges. I don't know why, but I've gotten used to like just drying my clothes on my little drying rack, and the washing a load takes a lot longer here. Usually an hour is like the average, sometimes an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, but it's not a problem because it's in my house and I don't have to worry about anyone stealing my laundry or moving it without my knowledge. I'll never go back to not having one. And the last culture shock I want to talk about is the system of credit, and particularly credit cards, which are not a thing here as much. What they call credit cards here are usually debit cards. Everyone has a debit card. Sometimes it will say MasterCard, Visa, but whenever you buy something, the money comes directly out of your bank account. Those are different from credit cards, which are very prevalent in the US, but are very difficult to obtain here in Italy. I got my first credit card. I think I was 17. I was in college and it was like the first week of school. I was on a scholarship, but I needed money to buy a book. They had little booths outside our campus bookstore. So they signed you up right there for a credit card. And I think you got like a free pen or something. And I think my first credit limit was like $1,000. I think I had a student job, but like they didn't even ask that info on my credit card application. It was just very, very simple. I don't know if that's still the case, but when I went to college, which was the late 90s, it definitely was really easy to get a credit card. So here, I know if you get a credit card, you have to have a relationship with a bank. They check your work history, your income, probably your taxes, and then you get a certain credit limit. And I think whatever you spend on it gets taken out of your bank account at the end of the month. So that's not the same thing as a revolving credit card where you have a certain limit. I can spend up to that amount, and as long as I make the minimum payment every month, it's fine. But the catch is they charge you interest. So credit card companies in the US will give you so many incentives to use their credit card, airline miles and cash back, and like they'll give you all these perks you get used to using credit cards. And yes, they're often overused, but they're also needed for certain expenses that you wouldn't necessarily have outside the US. I needed to buy all my furniture and appliances and everything for my new apartment, and if I didn't have my US credit cards, I don't know how I would have done it. Certain stores have lines of credit for that reason. There are some things available here, but it's definitely not a common thing to just have tens of thousands of dollars in credit cards like we have in the US. Not super shocking, but it's something that I had to adjust to. There's a lot of more money stuff that I want to talk about, but this video is getting kind of long, so I'll probably do a part 2. Were any of these surprising to you? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.